Hello and welcome back to Culture TV. By the end of this video, you should be able to use and identify prefixes used in notion verbs in Russian. So what's the prefix? Well, it's an element, so a letter or multiple letters added to the start of a word to modify the meaning. We have this in English. For example, undo, misunderstand, recycle, overheat. All of those combinations of letters at the start, they're all prefixes. Okay? Now, in Russian, as you may already know, prefixes are very important because they're used very often, and many verbs can use several prefixes. They can have many of these combinations of letters added on to the start of them, okay? And that means that each time we get a different notion, a different alteration of meaning, okay? So for GCSE, you need to know quite a few prefixes, but the main ones, the ones that are used most commonly in Russian, are these four, and we'll look at those today. We have pri, za, vy, and u. Now each prefix in Russian is associated with its own meaning. So each time it's tagged onto the start of a verb, it generally brings about a similar change, a similar alteration of meaning. What I mean by that is pri tends to mean something like arrival, going into somewhere, movement inwards, okay? For example, the verb приходить means to arrive. За has a similar meaning. It also means movement inwards, but we're really specifying that we're going from outside of somewhere, so external, into somewhere, okay? For example, зайти means to come in, not just arrive, okay? You can arrive to a location, to a town, but зайти is generally referred to buildings. We also have засыпать. Now this is not a motion verb. It means to fall asleep. So you can kind of think of it as you're moving into your sleep. So you weren't sleeping, that's kind of external, and now you're internally sleeping. Вы is the opposite. It means movement outwards. For example, выйти. That means to go out of a building or any place that has boundaries, okay? And finally, у generally conveys departure, okay? For instance, уехать means to leave. Now we're going to look through a table like this, where we see all the combinations of prefixes and the main motion verbs in Russian all in one, okay? So we will have prefixes and verbs. Here are the prefixes, and the verbs we're going to look at are the most common ones, as I say. We have идти, which means to go by foot. That's in the imperfective aspect, and it is a unidirectional motion. Ходить, which is the same, however it's multidirectional. Ехать, this time we're going by vehicle, imperfective unidirectional. And ездить, the same but multidirectional. If you don't know what these terms means, then you need to revise the topic of motion verbs. There will be a video on our channel about this very soon, so please do keep your eyes out for that. Otherwise, let's move on to filling in the boxes. So, при plus идти actually gives us прийти. Прийти. Now, the de, as you can see, is lost, and we have прийти. That just sounds better to the Russian ear, alright? It's just more natural. And this means to arrive. Now, because we've added on a prefix, the aspect automatically changes to perfective, alright? If we want to say arriving by foot as well, but in the imperfective, all we do is we use the multidirectional. Приходить. That means to arrive by foot, but in the imperfective. So as you can see, when we're adding on prefixes, we're not actually differentiating between unidirectional and multidirectional, okay? It makes sense. If you're arriving to one place, you're just arriving. You can't be arriving using many routes or, we just have two verbs for arriving by foot. Arriving by vehicle will be приехать in the perfective and приезжать, this time in the imperfective. Let's move on to за. Same idea, зайти, to come in by foot, perfective. Заходить, to come in by foot, imperfective. Заехать, заезжать. Выйти, выходить, выехать, выезжать, уйти, уходить, уехать, уезжать. Now it's very easy to get confused here, so take it nice and slowly, write them all down, ensure that you understand the translation, so what is in blue there, below each verb, make sure that you know what that means, and imagine the action itself. So picture yourself or someone else doing that action, and that will help you remember it, okay? Now the next thing to look at is, of course, how do we conjugate each of these verbs? Now, for foundation tier, most of this you don't need to really know. You might have to understand it, so you need to have receptive knowledge of it, but you don't really need to use it. For higher tier students, you need to use yourself quite a bit of this, but some of the concepts here are actually quite difficult and only receptive knowledge is required. My personal recommendation is that you just learn all of this if you're finding this okay. If you are really struggling, then just stick to the easy parts, what you understand. So I'm assuming you're doing GCSE Russian because you're interested in the language or, a similar reason. So therefore, you shouldn't really be learning strictly what a specification tells you to do. There are no strict rules and boundaries. You need to be learning Russian as a language, not as a GCSE, as a document that tells you what you can and can't use, what you should and shouldn't learn, But anyway, that's a different topic. Let's have a look at how we conjugate идти. This really should be a reminder. You all should know this. Я иду, ты идешь, он, она, оно идет, мы идем, вы идете, они идут. What about ехать? Also quite simple. Я еду, ты едешь, он едет, мы едем, вы едете, они едут. Now many of these verbs, as you have noticed, are quite irregular, but unfortunately that's just what it is. Russian is not the only language where motion verbs are irregular. Right, now we'll have a look at ходить. I'm going to remind you that we have something called a consonant alteration here. So the letter D changes to a letter Ж, but only in the first person. So it will be я хожу, ты ходишь, он, она, оно ходит, мы ходим, вы ходите, они ходят. And we only have the alteration in first person because this verb, ходить, is the second conjugation group because it ends in it. So I, the soft sign, that conveys generally the second conjugation group. And constant alteration happens only for the first person singular in the second conjugation group. I'm overloading you there with grammatical terminology there. If you don't understand this, it's fine, just learn the conjugation of the verb. Okay, ездить, we have the same idea. Я езжу, ты ездишь, он ездит, мы ездим, вы ездите, они ездят. So the ultimate question really is, what happens with prefixes? Well, let's have a look. Приходить, let's see how we conjugate this in present tense. Я прихожу, ты приходишь, он приходит, мы приходим, вы приходите, они приходят. Nothing changes, we've just added on the prefix at the start, so the conjugation of the verb itself doesn't change, the process that we're following is the same. The perfective of arriving by foot is прийти. Now to avoid a double letter E, we just have one letter E, giving us я приду, ты придешь, он придет, мы придем, вы придете, они придут. Now let's have a look at the past tense. Идти is irregular. Я шел. Ты шла, so that's feminine, okay? We have to have the agreement with the past participle and the subject. So if ты is a girl, a woman, feminine, then it's шла. Likewise, if you are feminine, you also have to say шла. Он, она, оно, шел or шла. Or шло, if it's neuter. Мы шли, вы шли, они шли. Let's add on a prefix. Let's add on a prefix. Прийти. Я пришел, ты пришла, он, она, оно пришло, он пришел, мы пришли, вы пришли, они пришли. Okay? And it's the same principle pretty much for all the other prefixes. Now, we need to understand that it's not just motion verbs that use prefixes. They affect pretty much all verbs in Russian. To add a different notion, to add on different shades of meaning. The use of prefixes is not solely to change meaning, but also to convert between the two aspects. For example, we have pить and выпить. Now, вы, as we've seen already, generally conveys some kind of movement outwards. Now, how can you be drinking outwards? Spitting? Probably not. Vypít actually means to drink up. So it's the perfective of pít. So you have a vessel full of liquid and you drink all of the liquid in that bottle or cup or whatever it is. That is vypít. So you can't always predict the meaning. You very often have to learn it. And sometimes they modify meaning of verbs that convey no movement at all. Likewise again, pít and zapít. Now, as we've seen, za means inwards, okay? Now, inwards drinking. This kind of makes sense, actually, because this verb in Russian actually means to drink down. So, for example, you've taken a pill and you need to gulp down some water to let the pill pass through down into your digestive system. That is zapít. And, you know, you could kind of have guessed that. But sometimes it's hard to predict these changes. And I recommend that you learn every verb plus a prefix at the start as a new piece of vocabulary. Just because you know, let's say, 5 prefixes and 5 verbs, it doesn't mean that you automatically know 25 new verbs in Russian. It doesn't work like that, because very often we have exceptions where one prefix doesn't operate as it usually does. For example, vy doesn't always mean outwards, as we've seen with vypít. But nevertheless, the principle is the same. So if you find a new prefixed verb, then you know how to conjugate them. I've shown you. There are very little exceptions. I don't think there are any, actually. So that's it. You've pretty much got all the tools to now use and identify prefixes. You're definitely prepared for your reading. And as for writing and speaking, just use what you know. Just use what you're comfortable with. Okay? If you have any questions, it's very important that you ask them in the comments. I'm always there to answer them because, as I say, this is a difficult topic. Likewise, any requests you have for videos. GCSE Russian is quite a niche subject and there aren't that many online teachers out there, so take this opportunity and upon any request we'll sort out a new video and help you out there. Thank you very much for your attention. I wish you all the very best. See you next time. Goodbye.